My name is Nomi G. Hale. I am 33 years old. For most of my adult life, I believe stability was something you built together, slowly, quietly, without needing an audience. Evan and I had been together for almost 5 years, engaged for 8 months, living in an apartment that slowly turned from his place into our life. On the surface, nothing looked wrong. He worked in product development, ambitious, always talking about growth and next steps. I worked in operations, structured, predictable, the kind of job that pays on time and doesn't need applause. I thought we balanced each other. Somewhere along the way, that balance became a problem. It started with comments that didn't sound like insults at first, just observations, framed as honesty. "You're very comfortable," he'd say. "You don't really push yourself the way I do. You don't think big enough sometimes." I told myself it was stress, that he was just restless. That ambition made people sharp around the edges. Then he started bringing up her. Not all at once, never directly, just enough to slip into conversation and stay there. Lena always understood this part of me. Lena never needed things spelled out. Lena was more independent. The first time I asked why he kept mentioning her, he laughed and told me I was reading too much into it. "She's just an example," he said. "Don't get insecure." That word stayed with me. Insecure. As if noticing comparison was a flaw, not a warning sign. The night everything shifted didn't come with shouting or tears. It came over dinner, on a random Tuesday, while I was cleaning up plates and he was pacing the living room, phone in hand, energized in a way that had nothing to do with me. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at me, and said it calmly. "I feel like you're holding me back." I didn't respond right away. I waited, expecting him to soften it, to explain, to realize what he'd just said. He didn't. Instead, he continued, like he'd been rehearsing this for a while. "Yeah, you're great, Nomi. You're supportive. You're stable. But that's kind of the problem. Lena never needed stability from me. She pushed me." There it was, out in the open. The comparison he'd been hiding behind jokes and half-sentences finally had a name. I asked him one question, quietly. "So I'm an obstacle now?" He didn't deny it. He sighed and said, "I just think I'm evolving, and you're staying the same." Something inside me went very still. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. Because in that moment, I realized something important. He wasn't angry at me, he wasn't confused, he wasn't even cruel. He was done valuing me. And when someone starts measuring your worth against another woman's shadow, the relationship is already over. I just didn't know yet how literal my exit was going to be. After that night, Evan didn't apologize. That should have been the first confirmation. He didn't come into the bedroom later to say he'd spoken out of frustration. He didn't circle back the next morning to clarify what he meant. He acted lighter instead, almost relieved, like saying it out loud had freed him from something. And that's when I understood. He hadn't just thought it. He'd been carrying it for a long time. Lena's name started showing up more often after that. Not aggressively, not like a confession, more like a reference point he couldn't stop using. She'd get this. Lena would never overthink something like that. You know what I liked about her? She didn't need reassurance all the time. Every sentence landed softly, but together they built something heavy. I noticed how he never said Lena was better outright. He didn't need to. He just placed her in the spaces where I used to be. When I asked why he was still talking to her, he didn't deny it. He minimized it. "We just catch up sometimes. She's in a similar phase. It's not like that." That phrase again. It's not like that. I asked him what it was like then. He looked at me like I'd asked the wrong question. "Why does it bother you so much?" he said. "That's what worries me." There it was. Not his behavior, my reaction. I started noticing the pattern in everything else too. If I questioned a plan, I was operating from fear. If I asked for clarity, I was blocking momentum. If I wanted reassurance, I was draining his energy. But Lena apparently never needed any of that. She trusted herself. She didn't need validation. She let me be me. I didn't recognize the man talking to me anymore. Or maybe I finally did. One night, while he was in the shower, his phone lit up on the counter. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The name on the screen was enough. Lena. Not hidden, not coded, just there. When he came back into the room, I asked him directly, calmly, "Are you emotionally involved with her?" He didn't say no. He laughed softly, like I'd misunderstood something obvious. "Why does everything have to be labeled with you? We're just aligned." Aligned, another word that sounded harmless until you realized what it was replacing. I told him I felt like I was being compared in my own relationship. He sighed, rubbed his face, and said the sentence that finally made everything clear. "I'm not comparing you, you're just different. Different. As in less. As in no longer what he wanted standing next to him. I went quiet after that, not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood the conversation we were actually having. He wasn't choosing between two women. He'd already chosen. I was just still living there. That night, lying in bed beside him while he scrolled through his phone, I realized something that hurt more than the comparison itself. He didn't think I would leave. He thought I would try harder. He thought I would adjust, soften, prove that I could be less of an obstacle if I really wanted to. And for the first time since we'd met, I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic argument, no slammed doors, no ultimatum thrown across the room. It was quieter than that. It started with me stopping myself mid-sentence. I noticed it one morning while we were getting ready for work. Evan was talking about a new opportunity, some late dinner he'd been invited to, a room full of people who thought differently. Normally, I would have asked questions, offered opinions, tried to insert myself into his excitement. That morning, I didn't. I just nodded. He didn't notice at first. He kept talking, pacing, energized by his own momentum. When he finally paused and looked at me, it was only to ask, "You're quiet. Everything okay?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, just listening." He seemed satisfied with that answer. Too satisfied. That's when it clicked. He didn't miss my voice. He missed my agreement. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to how much of myself I'd been pouring into holding us together, not in big gestures, but in small, constant adjustments. I was the one remembering dates, smoothing tension, translating his sharpness into something kinder when we were around other people. I was the one who apologized first, even when I didn't know what I was apologizing for yet. And now that I'd stopped doing those things, the house felt different, not cold, empty. Evan filled that emptiness with Lena. He didn't hide it. He didn't flaunt it either. He treated her presence like a given, like something so natural it didn't need explanation. He'd mention a conversation they'd had, an article she'd sent, an idea she'd really resonated with. Every time he watched my face, just for a second, like he was checking to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. One night, he said it more clearly than he had before. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, dinner half eaten. He was restless, phone face down for once, like he wanted my full attention. "I think you'd be happier if you didn't try to be everything for me," he said. I looked at him. "I'm not trying to be everything." He leaned back in his chair. "You kind of are." That's when I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. "Do you want to be with her?" He didn't say yes. He didn't say no either. He said, "I just think she challenges me in ways you don't." I felt something settle in my chest, heavy and final. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay?" "If she's better at those things," I continued calmly, "then let her be better at them." He laughed, relieved. He thought I'd back down. He thought I'd accepted my place in the hierarchy he'd built without telling me. That was the moment he missed everything. That night, while he slept, I opened my laptop and started making decisions. Not emotional ones, practical ones. I reviewed my accounts, the shared expenses, the wedding deposits we'd started putting down just to hold dates. The automatic transfers that quietly kept our life comfortable. I realized how much of our stability ran through me without ever being acknowledged as contribution. I didn't shut anything off that night. I just stopped adding to it. The next morning, Evan noticed the first crack. "Did you forget to pay the internet?" he asked, annoyed, staring at his phone. "No," I said. "I didn't forget." He looked at me. "Then why—" "I'm stepping back," I said evenly. He frowned. "From what?" "From managing things that don't belong to me." He stared like he didn't understand the sentence. "You're being passive-aggressive," he said finally. I shook my head. "I'm being literal." That irritated him more than anger ever could. Over the next few days, he kept waiting for the argument that never came. He provoked it in small ways. Comments about how Lena handled stress better, how she never needed reassurance, how independence was attractive. Each time I let the silence do the talking. And slowly, his confidence started to slip. Because comparison only works when the person being compared stays in the room. And I was already gone. Evan didn't panic right away. That's the thing people like him get wrong. They assume stability is permanent because it always has been. The first few days after I stopped managing everything, he treated it like a phase, like I'd sulk for a bit, then slide back into place. He still went out, still came home late, still talked about Lena like she was an idea, not a person, still believed the structure of our life would hold, even if I wasn't actively reinforcing it. Then the small inconveniences started stacking up. The electricity reminder came first, then the credit card notification, Then the calendar alert about a wedding deposit that was due in 3 days. He stood in the living room scrolling through his phone, irritation flickering across his face. "Did you see this?" he asked, holding the screen up toward me like evidence. "Yes," I said calmly. And what?" He stared at me. "So what are we doing about it?" That question used to be automatic. We meant me. I took a sip of my coffee. "I'm not doing anything about it." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. "You're serious," he said slowly. "I've been serious," I replied. That was the first time fear cracked through his annoyance. He tried reason next. "This is bad timing. You know things are transitional for me right now." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm stepping back." "You can't just stop like this," he snapped. "We're a team." I met his eyes. Teams communicate. Teams don't compare their partner to someone else and call it growth. His jaw tightened. "You're twisting everything." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally not editing it." That night, he barely slept. I could hear him pacing, typing, stopping, pacing again. I caught fragments of his conversations from the bedroom. Reassurance requests disguised as confidence. "Yeah, it's fine. She's just being sensitive." "No, we're good. Just adjusting." Adjusting. The next morning, Lena's name came up again, but this time it wasn't admiration. It was leverage. "She said you're doing this to manipulate me," he told me at breakfast. "She thinks you're trying to punish me for being honest." I looked up from my plate. "And what do you think?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "Honestly," he said, "I think you're overreacting." There it was again. The familiar dismissal, now laced with anxiety. I stood up and cleared my plate, then let it play out. He followed me into the hallway. "You're really going to blow everything up over this?" "I'm not blowing anything up," I said. "I'm letting it stand on its own." That was the moment he realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't asking for reassurance anymore. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't proving my value. I was observing. By the end of the week, the tone of his messages shifted. Not to me, about me. I heard it in his phone calls, the careful wording, the attempts to sound in control. "Yeah, she's just finding herself." "No, it's temporary." Temporary. That word used to belong to my discomfort. Now it belonged to his certainty. On Friday night, he finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Are you leaving me?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I already have," I said. He laughed, sharp and defensive. "You're still here." "Physically," I said, "not emotionally." That's when the panic set in for real. He tried kindness next, the version he hadn't used in months. He cooked dinner, asked about my day, touched my arm like muscle memory could restore something he'd already lost. "I don't want to lose you," he said softly. I believed him. What he didn't say was that he didn't want to lose what I provided. I stepped back gently. "Then you shouldn't have made me feel replaceable." He opened his mouth, closed it, then said the sentence that sealed everything. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." And there it was, the truth he'd been circling since the beginning. He never thought I had the option. He kept acting like time was on his side. That was Evan's last mistake. After he said he didn't think I'd actually leave, something in him relaxed, like he'd finally named the monster and decided it wasn't real. He went back to routines, half-routines anyway. Came home later again. Talked less carefully. Mentioned Lena casually, like I was supposed to understand that she wasn't a threat anymore now that I'd proven I was still here. But I wasn't. I'd already stopped imagining a future that included him. The morning I packed, there was no announcement, no argument, no dramatic last conversation where he could twist my words into something survivable. I waited until he left for work, listened to the door close, then stood in the quiet and felt nothing but resolve. I packed what was mine, clothes, documents, the things that mattered. I didn't take the decorative items we'd chosen together, the things that existed more for appearance than meaning. I left those exactly where they were. Let him keep the version of us he'd curated. By the time he texted me around noon, asking if I'd seen his charger, I was already gone. I didn't reply. When he got home that evening, I wasn't there to explain. I know because he called, then called again, then sent a message that tried to sound casual and failed. "Where are you?" I waited an hour before answering. Not to be cruel, to be clear, I moved out. The typing bubble appeared immediately, then vanished, then reappeared. "What do you mean you moved out?" "This isn't funny. You're overreacting again." Again. I didn't respond to that one. He showed up at my sister's place the next night. I wasn't surprised. People like him don't accept closed doors easily. They look for side entrances. He looked wrecked when I opened the door, not heartbroken, unprepared. "You can't just disappear like that," he said. "We didn't even talk." I leaned against the doorframe. "We talked for months." That's not the same, he snapped. You didn't give me a chance. I looked at him, really looked, and realized something important. He didn't want a chance to fix it. He wanted a chance to stall it. I gave you chances, I said quietly. You used them to compare me to someone else. That wasn't... I don't care what it wasn't, I interrupted. I care what it was. He stared at me like I'd just rewritten the rules of a game he thought he was winning. You'll come back, he said, softer now. You always calm down. I shook my head. You confuse my patience for permanence. That was the moment his confidence finally collapsed. You're really leaving me for this, he asked. For one comparison? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I'm leaving because you thought I'd tolerate it. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just stood there, stunned, watching the version of me he thought he owned walk away without asking permission. After that, the messages came in waves. First anger, then confusion, then apology, then nostalgia. Every week, almost on schedule. I was wrong. I didn't mean it. I miss you. I see it now. But here's the thing he never understood. I didn't leave because he compared me to another woman. I left because he thought comparison was acceptable leverage. 3 months later, I heard he and Lena tried to make something work. It fizzled fast. She didn't want responsibility. He didn't want accountability. Two people mistaking admiration for connection. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. The last message he sent me said, I didn't think you'd actually be okay without me. I didn't reply. Because the truth was simple. I wasn't just okay. I was finally myself again. Time did the rest. Not in a dramatic way. Not with some final confrontation or a cinematic moment where everything clicked for him at once. Time worked quietly, the way it always does when someone removes themselves completely and refuses to circle back. At first, Evan kept telling people the breakup was mutual, that we'd grown apart, that I needed space, that I was overwhelmed, safe words, soft explanations that allowed him to keep his dignity intact. People nodded, accepted it, moved on. That was the version he preferred. But reality doesn't care about preferred versions. Little things started unraveling once I was no longer there to absorb them. Bills that used to disappear on autopay didn't anymore. Appointments got missed. Social plans fell through because someone forgot to confirm. Dinners turned into takeout eaten alone, then skipped altogether. He started showing up late, looking tired, less sharp. Not broken, just unmanaged. The people around him noticed before he did. A mutual friend mentioned casually that Evan seemed distracted lately. Another asked if he was okay because he'd been snapping over small things. Someone joked that he'd lost his anchor. They laughed when they said it, but the word landed. Anchor, that was how he'd seen me without ever saying it out loud. Not a partner, not an equal. A stabilizing force that allowed him to drift without consequence. Without me, everything felt heavier to him, even though nothing had technically changed. Except me. My life, on the other hand, got quieter in a way I hadn't realized I was craving. Not empty, intentional. Mornings where I didn't brace myself for someone else's mood. Evenings where silence wasn't punishment or tension, just peace. Conversations where I didn't have to prove my worth by being agreeable. I stopped checking my phone expecting his name to appear. When it did, less and less frequently, it felt distant, like hearing from a former coworker instead of someone who once knew me intimately. The last time he reached out, months after everything ended, the message was different. Not an apology, not an attempt to come back, just confusion. I still don't understand how you walked away so cleanly, he wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time before deciding not to answer, because the truth wouldn't have helped him. The truth was that I didn't walk away cleanly in the moment. I walked away tired. Worn down by 1,000 small dismissals, by being measured against someone else without being asked, by being expected to stay calm, while my value was quietly negotiated behind my back. I walked away because staying would have required me to keep shrinking. And once you notice yourself shrinking, you can't unsee it. I heard later that Evan tried to reconnect with Lena again, briefly. That didn't last either. She wanted admiration without commitment. He wanted reassurance without accountability. Two people orbiting the same problem from different sides. It wasn't my concern anymore. One evening, months later, I ran into him by accident. A grocery store, different aisle, familiar face. We made eye contact. He hesitated like he wasn't sure what version of me he'd get. I smiled politely. He asked how I was doing. I said, good. Not performative, not defensive, just true. He nodded, searching my face for something. Anger, regret, triumph. He didn't find any of it. What he saw instead was calm, the kind that doesn't ask permission. As we walked away from each other, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd opted out, and that was better. Here's what I learned, and it's the part I wish I'd understood sooner. When someone compares you to another person, they're not just measuring differences, they're testing how much you'll tolerate. They're checking whether you'll stay quiet to keep the peace, whether you'll compete for basic respect, whether you'll accept being made smaller to keep the relationship intact. The comparison isn't the problem. The comfort with making it is. I didn't leave because Evan thought someone else was better at a few things. I left because he thought that belief gave him power over me. And the moment he assumed I wouldn't leave was the moment I finally did. I didn't disappear to punish him. I disappeared to protect myself. And once you choose yourself that clearly, there's nothing left to explain.